you want to export your model to a format that a 3D printer can print, the one thing you have to know is what the software for the printer prefers, whether it's a commercial service you're using or your own printer you have at home. There's a lot of varying opinions and there's a lot of formats out there. Let's have a look at some of them in Blender 3D. If you go to File and Export, there is a list of default export options. A lot of these are supported. For instance, basically the default is STL. An STL is a very simple file that just has the geometry data in it. So if we do export STL and we set a location in the top bar and the file name in the bar below, you can export. Have a look though on the left, there are always a bunch of options in here. For instance, apply modifiers. If you have any modifiers on your model, you will want to have this one checked. It is checked by default, so you should be okay. I know there's an ASCII option. I don't really know why it's there. Maybe it is there in case you want to upload in an ASCII format. I'm not sure. You don't need to check that at all. A really nice new option is the scale option below. This has been added to all the export options and can be a bit of a savior. If, for instance, in this case, let's have a look. I have blue here set up with 7.5 Blender units tall. If I export to a format and find out that he is 7.5 millimeters tall and I want him actually to be 7.5 centimeters tall, so he should be 10 times bigger than what I had as a result, I can go export and say I want to scale him up by 10, and when you export it's going to scale up your model that much. You can of course scale your model inside Blender, but doing it at the point of export means you don't have to change your file. So also, if for instance you're working in a game file from an actual game, you don't have to modify the actual game files to get your model out at a specific size. This is a very nice new addition. That is STL. The big downside to STL is it does not allow for color data. I went ahead and opened another file. This is a different version of Blue, one that I baked with a bit of color on him, so we can export with color. By the way, I mentioned STL was the default. You can use OBJ or whatever you want as well. For color though, you need a specific format or two specific formats usually. You can use, let's have a look, export. You can use either X3D or VRML2. Personally, I kind of prefer VRML2 because I know that a lot of print machines and the software for the machines work with VRML2. But I know some commercial services prefer the X3D format. The nice thing about both formats is that they are basically text. They are XML formats, so you can actually edit the file after you export. So let's see what I would do if I were to export a color model, because you need multiple files. You need both the 3D file and the texture file. I have here the image texture. I will save it. I will save a copy somewhere, or I will save this image actually, because that means this Blender file will remember where I saved it, and I will do it on my desktop, and I will make a new folder. I will call it my export, and yep, it's called bakedtexture.png. I can save, all these settings are fine. So I have bakedtexture.png in my export folder. Now I want to export my model. I have the image, export the model, file, export. I will use VRML2 and have a look at the menu. In this case, really, I only want my selection. I don't want to try to export cameras or other objects. I only want the selection I have. This is quite important, and I do advise you to do the same. Select what you want to export and check the selection only box. If you want to export with texture UVs, you have to have it checked, and I would suggest you uncheck vertex color. Because if you also have vertex color, maybe the printer will say, hey, you gave me 2 types of color data, I don't know which to use, and he might print with the wrong color data. So you don't want vertex color. And the path mode, I would usually set it to relative, because you will send him both files. It won't work if it's pointing to somewhere on your computer if you send it to him. So I have it on relative, selection only, yes, apply the modifiers, and I want my texture UVs, not my vertex colors. I will export, I will just call him blue.baked.wrl. That's the file format. I hit enter to confirm that that's the name of the file I want, and then I hit export VRML, which is underneath me somewhere. This is done. That is nice. If I go to my desktop, I will make this small. I have an export folder here, and in there I have a baked texture.png. Where is my WRL export? I will do it again. Baked blue. I was in the wrong folder. I have to go to my desktop, export folder, relative path, texture UVs. I have to keep paying attention, and I'll do it again. If I now go back to the folder, there we go. We have a blue.baked.wrl file. Here's the thing. I've checked that it should be a relative path, but out of experience, I advise you to double check this yourself. The path really has to work, and there shouldn't be any conflict. A nice way to do that is actually inside Blender. If I take this screen, let's make it a little bigger, and I make it into a text editor. I choose text editor. Now the big 3D view has become a text editor. I can open a text block. I go to my desktop export folder, and I see nothing. I know there's 2 files, but they're being filtered, so you don't see them, because usually Blender doesn't do anything with WRL files. I will unclick the little, or depress the little funnel, so it's no longer filtered. I can see all files, and I want to open this WRL file in my text editor. Open text block, and this is the contents of the file. And you want to make sure the URL, you see it's done it beautifully in this case, it is relative. So I have the texture in the same folder as the WRL file, so I should have the file name of the texture without any folders in front of it. I have had in the past sometimes folders in front. Make sure it works for you. If this, for instance, were to say c / my folder / and you send it off to a 3D printer, they will send it back and say there is an error in your file. They don't go in there actually and check it for you. Also, these files can get really, really big. The WRL files, the X3D files, they are quite large. If you want to do this and make sure the path is correct, and you want to do it in a normal text editor, it can be really, really slow. Surprisingly enough, or maybe unsurprisingly enough, the text editor in Blender is really good at handling very big files. So if the file is multiple megabytes, or maybe even 100 megabytes big, you can still open it and edit it quite well in Blender's text editor. I'll go back to the 3D view. This is how I would go about it in this case. These 2 are fine. This has the right path in it. I can create a new zipped file. So I make a zip, and in my zip program, in my case I use 7-zip, I just drag both of these in here. Yep, put both of them in. Once they're in your zip, I can upload this to a commercial service and have it printed with full color. Now another way to export is using the brand new 3D print tool panel. If you haven't seen it yet, go have a look. It is on the left in the tool shelf. If you go to the bottom, you should have a print 3D section. If you don't, go to File, User Preferences, and look in the search box. You type print and you should find a Mesh 3D print toolbox. It's there as of Blender 2.67. Make sure it's checked. If it wasn't before, check it now and save your user settings if you want to keep the toolbox for later. We can close this up, and in the toolbox, let's have a quick look. At the bottom is an export section. So you don't have to go to File, Export, type everything in. You can do it right here. I will set the path. The default is 2 slashes. That means you're exporting to the same folder you saved your Blender file in. I will open a new folder, go to my desktop, create new directory. This is my 3D print tools export, because that way I know exactly where I'm doing it. Go into the folder and accept. That path has now been set in my export path. Really good. And I can export to an STL. Let's have a look in the folder. It's on my desktop, 3D print tools, and it's created an STL in there for me. You can see it's 002 blue. Well, that was my file name for the Blender file. Blue with a capital B is the name of the object. So if I go in here and I add a cube and hit export again and go to my folder, it has made a blue-cube.stl only of the cube. So this exports what you have selected. It's very, very handy if you need to export multiple versions of the same object. You can just select it, hit export, hit export, hit export, and it creates new files all the time. Of course, sometimes you do here also want to export with an image. You can press the image icon. That way an image is exported along with the model, and select a format that supports UV textures, for instance VRML2. If I hit export now and go to my 3D print tools export folder, I'm making it hard on myself, we've got a blue-cube.wrl. Remember, no images, because I just made a default gray cube that doesn't have any image, so it doesn't export it either. That's exactly the way we want it. If I select blue and hit export again, it's very quick, and in here we now have a .wrl version of blue, and there is a textures folder that wasn't there before. Now personally, I'm not really happy with it putting the images in a textures folder. I would normally put the image in the same folder as the file. So I'm going to change that manually here. I'm not sure this is going to stay this way for future versions of Blender. I'm in 2.67, the official release. In here it's doing it this way. What I will do is cut the texture and paste it in the folder with my 3D model. I can remove the textures folder, but now I have to make sure the path to the texture from the WRL file is correct. I'll do that by opening it in Blender. So we go to the text editor, text, open text block from my desktop folder, don't filter, blue WRL, that's the one. And you can see it's made these really big paths to the texture. This is an absolute path. Well, I don't need it, it's in the same folder, so I can just have the image name. This is really the way you want to keep these things. Just the image name should be in there. Now that I've changed it, I can do text, save it, and once it's saved I can export or put them, these two together in a zip file, and upload them for 3D printing.